Welcome to Student Success for Higher Learning, LIBS 1540 or LIBS 1810. We're going to discuss Chapter 6 today. Chapter 6 is about preparing for and taking tests. Now, we all love taking tests, right? It's always so much fun. But I'm going to walk you through a few things today that will hopefully help you become better at taking tests and being less anxious when taking tests. So I don't know about you, but whenever I had tests or exams, I was always very, very nervous. So I'm going to talk to you about how to overcome that nervousness as well as a few other things. So our objectives today are knowing what exams really are and why the right attitude is important for success. Also discovering how studying for and taking tests fits into the learning cycle that we've been talking about. We're going to talk about dealing with test anxiety, and we're going to learn when, where, and how to study. We're going to talk about different types of tests and test questions to help you become better at test taking. I'm going to teach you some tips for multiple choice, true, false questions, etc., and learning about applying strategies for test taking. So when we look at tests, you may often wonder what the purpose is of taking a test. And really what a test does is it doesn't measure how smart you are. It just measures what you know at that particular point in time. It can show me, the teacher, what you know, but it also shows you how much you know, and not whether you're smart or not. It can also help us measure how good we are becoming at a specific skill. So if you're taking a maths course, when you are taking the math, we all start at the addition stage, and then we work on the subtraction stage. Then we work on our multiplication and our division. Without those basic skills, we can't move on to the more complex mathematics, such as calculus and algebra and geometry. We need to have those basic skills. So if you are tested in those basic skills, the teacher can see whether or not it's time to move on to the higher level skills. Now, believe it or not, tests are also a good learning opportunity, because by taking a test, you can see how much you know and how much you don't know. And when it comes to exams, then you can focus on the information that you don't know and hopefully do better on the exams. So when we talk about tests in the learning cycle, we've got the prepare, the absorb new ideas, the record ideas, the review, apply, and prepare. So we talked about preparing for class. So reading the textbook, looking at the PowerPoint slides, going over your notes from last week, then absorbing new ideas, sitting in class and listening to these ideas, or listening to podcasts, or perhaps videos that your professors have put up. And then we record, so we take notes and we memorize, we put things into long-term memory. So when we're writing our tests, we review before we take the tests, and then we apply that knowledge. Then once we've taken that test, we can then use those tests to then prepare for our next test or exam. So that's how the learning cycle applies to the idea of taking tests. So when we're studying for tests or exams, when I was in high school, I had a teacher say to me that the best way to study for a test or exam is to start well ahead of time. So the first thing that you can do is something that we've already talked about, which is reviewing your notes. Right? And you can review those right after class. You can review them that evening. You can review them before you go to your next class. But reviewing is really important, and trying to get into the habit of reviewing frequently is very good because it helps the information get into your long-term memory. But what my teacher suggested is, and again, you want to make sure you are dividing this up into small chunks. So maybe 25 to 30 minutes a day. So 3 weeks before the test or exam, reread your notes, decide what you don't know, and then make study notes from these points. So then the 2 weeks before the exams, every evening, go through and review your study notes and make questions from these notes to test yourself. And again, this helps you remember the information better. The week before the test, each night, go through your notes, go through your questions, and try to answer all of the questions that you have written. So, and again, break your study session into 25 or 30 minutes a day, so you don't have to do it all at once. It's better to review in chunks. And you can review whenever you can. You can review as you're brushing your teeth. You can review as you're brushing your hair. I wouldn't advise trying to review while you are in the shower unless you have waterproof notes. And if you're putting on makeup, don't try to review, because if you're putting on eyeshadow or mascara, you might poke yourself in the eye. So not a good idea. Now, some of us suffer from what is called test anxiety. Now, test anxiety is when we walk into a test and we're really, really nervous. And it could simply be that the test makes us nervous, we're worried, we don't know the information. There's all sorts of information or all sorts of reasons for why we have test anxiety. And if you look at the activity in your textbook under section 6.1, test anxiety and how to deal with it, there is an activity and it asks you questions, true or false questions, that can help you figure out how much test anxiety you suffer from. So it's a good idea to look at that because it will help you understand your level of test anxiety. Now, no one is going to see this, so be as honest as possible. When we have test anxiety, we often don't perform as well on tests as we would otherwise. So when we look at test anxiety, we want to make sure that we have some amount of stress. If we have stress that is too low, we're not motivated to do anything. So we often don't study as hard, or we don't work on assignments if they're not due very quickly. And on tests, we may not work as quickly as we need to. Too much stress, on the other hand, causes us to panic or to freeze so that we don't remember information that we know we're supposed to know. So trying to aim for a mid-level or moderate amount of stress is best because it keeps us motivated and it helps us perform well. But if you have too much anxiety, you're going to forget the information that is in your short-term memory. So when I said about studying 3 weeks before, 2 weeks before, 1 week before, part of the reason for this is the more we review, the better it stays in our long-term memory. And our long-term memory is not as affected by stress as our short-term memory is. So do pay attention to that. Now, if you have severe test anxiety, here are some ways to deal with it. So first of all, be prepared. So make sure you're studying. Don't leave it to the night before and cram. Cram means exactly that. You're leaving everything to the last minute and you're trying to learn as much as possible at the last minute. You also want to get rid of negative thoughts. So instead of thinking, I'm going to fail this exam, think, I'm going to do as well as I can do. You can also visualize your success. Visualize getting that A or A plus or 100%. But again, don't put too much stress on yourself because remember that in a test situation, we rarely do as well as we would do in just a classroom situation. The next thing is don't compare your success to others. Some people may do really well on a test and some people may not. This is a snapshot of your knowledge, not how you compare to everyone else. So, and again, have a plan for studying and follow through with that. So we've done our semester schedule, so add into that when you're going to start studying if you haven't done it already. Another key thing is to eat well and get a good night's sleep before the test or exam, which is often easier said than done. Now, if you have a test or an exam first thing in the morning and you're not very hungry, then try to have something that is high in protein. So you may have some vegetables and hummus. You may have a boiled egg. You could have anything that's going to give you a little bit of energy. And make sure you drink well too. Water, that is, not alcohol. And you also want to try and relax. One way to relax is just to focus on your breathing. You take a deep breath in through your nose and then let it out through your mouth. So try that with me 3 times. So deep breath in through your nose and then out through your mouth. And again, in through your nose and out through your mouth. And once more, in through your nose and out through your mouth. So even doing that, you can see can help relax you. But when you're doing it, make sure you take deep breaths and focus just on your breathing. Now, part of the reason why we study is so that we can learn information. So when you're studying to learn information, you want to make sure that you're studying every day. So you're reviewing, you're applying, you're trying to use the information that you have learned. You also want to try to study in course units. So when you're studying for a test, what was one of the units that you took? And how does that information all interconnect? And then begin studying the material at least a week before the exam or the test. But again, I recommend that you try at least 3 weeks. And if you don't have kids at home, or you don't have annoying parents at home, try to schedule a consistent study time. So you know that each day you have to study X, Y, Z. You also want to try to study in a quiet space. If you can, try to invest in some noise-reducing headphones as well, and then listen to something like classical music so that you're not being disturbed. You also want to minimize your distractions. So put away your cell phone, turn off your social media, and just pay attention to what it is that you need to study. If you find you're having difficulty concentrating, then take a break. And again, break your studying up into small chunks. And you also want to schedule breaks for yourself. So after you've finished 25 or 30 minutes or even 40 minutes, give yourself a break. Get up, walk around, get yourself a tea or a coffee or water, get yourself a snack, and then go back to studying again. Now, during times of non-COVID, we can often try to study in groups. And this involves meeting face-to-face. However, you can still do this when we are learning remotely as well. So you can study in groups, and you can organize those groups depending on who you know studies very well or who you get along with. But you want to make sure that if you're studying in groups, that you keep your groups small and that you choose your people wisely. Because when you study in groups, you need to have a focus. So you want to look for people who may be very strong in another language if you're studying a language course. Or you want to look for people who are very strong in mathematics if you're in a science or engineering course. You want to look for people who are good at taking notes because then they can share the notes with the rest of the group. And you also want to meet regularly. So try to set a study time that you can all get together. It's also important to create an agenda and decide what it is that you want to cover in that week's meeting. You can also assign follow-up work. So if there's something that you didn't understand in that particular lesson or that particular study session, you can have follow-up. You can also have someone who is in charge of running the meeting, somebody who's in charge of taking notes, somebody who's in charge of recording questions that need to be answered, and you want to try to rotate those roles so that everybody has a chance to do those. Now, you may hear your professors talk about the difference between formative and summative assessments. I just want to go over this very briefly so that you know the vocabulary. A formative assessment can be a quiz, it can be review questions, it could be tests, but they're done to make sure that you know the material. The summative assessment is a midterm exam or a final exam to make sure that you've actually mastered most of the material that you were presented with. So that was basically all I wanted to point out with this particular terminology. Now we have different types of tests. We have paper tests, and there are still professors who prefer this. We have tests that might be multiple choice and that you just fill in bubbles for the tests. We also have open book tests and take-home tests, online tests, electronic tests in the classroom, and presentations and oral tests. So the paper-based tests I'm sure you're used to. The open book tests are often, they sound really good, but they're often more difficult than a closed book test because you're expected to know more in-depth material and you're expected to know where to find that material. So it can take a lot of time getting your notebook set up and getting your textbook set up for an open book test. Now, a take-home test is one that you can do on your own at home. Online tests are one of the ways that many professors are going now. And with online tests, you may or may not be required to use a lockdown and prove who you are. Electronic tests in the classroom, again, these are often things that are done when you're in computer labs. And then presentations and oral tests, again, remember that these are just tests and they're just done to see what your knowledge is at that particular time. Some tips for taking tests. As you can see, there are a number of them. But the first thing is you want to learn as much as you can about the test. So don't miss class before the test because many professors will have review before the test. If they don't plan on having a review, you can always ask for one. You can also, based on the PowerPoint slides and based on questions that your professor asks in class, you can try to project or try to guess what type of questions will be on the test. Now, many professors will tell you the types of questions. You have to figure out what the content might be. And as I mentioned before, don't cram the night before. So you want to make sure that you are studying long before the test, not trying to learn everything the night before. And get to the test site early. So if you're doing an online test, you want to make sure that you're there at least 10 or 15 minutes before the test starts so that you can make sure everything is working properly. Because technology is wonderful. It doesn't always work when we need it to, though. Okay. You want to create a test plan and write it down, too. You might not have time to write it down, but look at the test and decide how much time you're going to spend on each section. You also want to make sure that you're reading the directions carefully so that you understand exactly what the test is about. The next step is doing the easy questions first, because once you've done the easy questions, your confidence level is much higher, and in a way, you're convincing yourself that you do know the material. You also want to make sure, too, that you're keeping an eye on the time. And then finally, Try to make time at the end of your test so that you can go back and you can check your work. And this is especially important when you are doing a math or a science test. I do have one tip for you though. If you are doing a true false or a multiple choice test, when you go back and check your answers, you want to make sure that unless you are 100% sure your answer is wrong, do not change it. Because most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, our first guess is the correct one. So unless you know 100% that your answer is wrong, don't change it. Now there's a couple of tips for preparing for your math tests. Now, with your math tests, oops, sorry, it skipped a slide, okay. So you want to make sure for math and sciences that you're attending all classes so that you're not missing important formulas or important information. And then think about how the problems can be solved in real life rather than just an abstract. And again, if you're studying in groups, you want to take turns presenting solutions. And finally, if you don't understand the concepts, get help. So for math and sciences, you can go to the Student Success Office and go to the Learning Commons because they have tutors there who can help you. Or you can also go to your professor because they're more than happy to help. So when you're preparing for a math test and taking them, you want to review the entire test before you actually start going through the test. Make sure you read the problem through twice to make sure you know exactly what you have to do. And then go through and compute your answer, and don't forget to check your work. Now, science tests are very similar. So, and again, before the test, you want to review your lab notes, your class notes, and your assignments. And again, when you're in the test, read the questions carefully. Many science courses or tests also have diagrams, so pay close attention to those diagrams. And then when you're reading the question, identify the hypothesis or what the idea is, and prepare to explain the structure to prove the hypothesis. Now, multiple choice questions are very popular. When you are looking at a multiple choice question, you want to read the instructions very carefully. So for example, if it says choose one answer, make sure you do that. Also, when you are doing multiple choice tests, if it says circle the answer, then make sure you circle the answer, because this is part of the instructions. If you put a check mark, you may not get a grade for your answer. You also want to read the question slowly and carefully, and read each question and try to answer it before looking at the answer choices. You also want to look for words that hint that certain answers may be correct or incorrect. So for multiple choice and for true false questions, one of the things that some of the words you want to look for are all, every, none. So for example, if you have a true false question and it says all Canadians love winter, you know it can't be true, because there are some people that absolutely love winter, there are some people that absolutely hate winter, and some people who don't care. Or they may like certain parts of winter, but not everything. So when you see words like that, you know that it's an overgeneralization and it can't be true. You also want to look for the word not in a question. So for example, a multiple choice question could be, a SMART goal is not A, B, C, or D. So if you read too quickly and you miss that word not, then you'll answer the question incorrectly. When we look at true or false questions, again, you want to look for the words like never, always, every, none, and not. And when you're doing true and false, you want to answer the questions that are obvious to you at first. So again, what are the easiest questions? If the question is stated in the positive, so many people like, try stating it in the negative. So many people don't like, and see if you can figure out the answer. And finally, if you're not sure, even for true or for true, false, and even for multiple choice, you can always try to guess the correct answer. Now, do be careful though, because some teachers will deduct marks or take away marks for an incorrect answer. So you want to make sure that if you don't know the answer and marks are taken away, don't guess. Other times, if it doesn't matter, then take a guess. But again, let me remind you, with the true, false, and multiple choice, if you have made a guess and you go back and check your answers, unless you are 100% sure your answer is wrong, don't change it. Another type of question is the matching of columns. So you want to make sure when you're looking at matching columns, see if they're equal or not. And if they're not equal, maybe some answers are not included. You also want to make sure that you are paying attention to the instructions. And you want to start with the words that the match is most obvious. So a lot of times you'll see this with definitions. So if you're taking a biology course, it may say a cell is, and you need to match it with the definition. So try to make sure that you answer those in pencil first so that you can go back and erase anything that is incorrect. Short answer questions are also very popular. And these are done to test your specific knowledge. So you want to keep your answers short. They're not essays. And make sure that you're stating what the professor wants to know. So a short answer question could be something like, what is a SMART goal? Explain it. So a SMART goal, then you would have to explain what all of the letters stand for and give a short explanation of them. One of the difficult types of questions is an essay question. And essay questions are often found on final exams. And essay questions are given to you to see what you know and how you explain it. So you want to read the questions very, very carefully so that you know what you are being expected to do. So are you being asked to analyze? Are you being asked to compare? Are you being asked to critique an idea? Or are you being asked to define something? It's very important to understand these so that you know how to answer the question. And again, all of these words are in section 6.4 of your textbook or on page 220 if you've downloaded the PDF. Academic dishonesty, as we've already talked about, is something that is very, very important in North America. And you want to make sure when you are writing a test that you don't cheat. And there are reasons for it. The first one is you're not going to learn as much as when you actually study yourself or take the test. Also, if you're caught cheating, you can get 0 on the test, but you're also reported for academic dishonesty. If you get caught 3 times or more, you can be expelled from the school, which means you can't come back. So you spent all that money for nothing. Also, professors do share information. So I work very closely with the ESL department, and we will often talk about students who have been caught being who are cheating or who have plagiarized essays. So do pay attention to this because it is very important. So examples of academic dishonesty include cheating, so copying your answers from somebody else. If it's an online test, doing the test together. If it is a case of using somebody's previous assignment, that's considered plagiarism. Okay? Fabrication means that you are writing something and saying it's yours when it's not really yours. Obtaining an unfair advantage could mean you've gotten a copy of the test, or you've seen previous year's tests that might be the same. Aiding and abetting academic dishonesty, this means you're letting somebody else cheat from you or sharing answers. So these are all examples of academic dishonesty that you don't want to be caught in. Now, once you get your test back, you want to evaluate your test results, and you don't want to throw your tests away, and you don't want to just put them in the binder as soon as you get them. Teachers will often go through the tests with you to review them. So you want to make sure that you're writing down the correct answers so that when you have the next test or the final exam, you know that you are doing things properly. So use your former tests as study material for exams. You also want to make sure that you're correcting your mistakes. So when you get home, for the multiple choice questions, for example, write out the correct statement and then form a correct statement or a question. For true-false questions, again, write out the full correct statement. For math and science, redo the entire calculation. For essay questions, you might want to try to make a better outline and try to give yourself a certain period of time and try to write the essay. Many professors will actually go through an essay that you have done after the test and give you feedback. So when you are looking at studying for your final exams, it's important to use the test as a study guide. So you want to put the corrected test with your study notes and use this to review for midterm or final exams. And this also helps you pay attention to what gaps there might be in your knowledge so that you can study for that a little bit harder. You add to your study notes, and if you are looking at reviewing, you want to review throughout the semester, not just before the exams. And use the test to help you predict what types of questions might be on the final exams or the midterm exams. So the chapter takeaways for this, and a little bit of test anxiety is helpful because it helps motivate you, it helps keep you working. Too little and you don't work as quickly, too much and you don't remember information. So studying needs to take place on a regular basis as well. So you want to do it regularly, you want to schedule it, and you want to make sure that you are understanding the different strategies involved for taking the tests. You want to make sure that you are behaving with academic integrity. And finally, you want to use your tests to help you study for the rest of the semester. So I hope this has helped. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. And good luck with overcoming test anxiety and good luck on your tests.